been 10 speakers before me. Of all these speakers, I'm probably the only one of them who is an alumnus of this institution. And also of all these speakers, I'm probably the only one who is fortunate enough to have his supervisor, his mentor, and now his friend in attendance. Professor Harvey Sussman, verifiably one of the best minds around, and to my mind, a model of scholarship and also a model teacher. Now, if it is possible at all to dedicate a talk, I would like to dedicate this talk to the Center for African and African American Studies, now called Warfield Center, specifically underscoring the exemplary works and dedicated services of its two directors, Drs. Gordon and Jones. The center, before its current transformation, architecture inclusive, provided offices for graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, faculty members, student workers, and staff. So interaction was possible on all levels. The center also made it possible for activists and community members to be involved in all their programming. So conversation was really not just limited to scholars among themselves. On one occasion, we had a talk that was so emotionally charged that one of the participants wept. Thereafter, I got into a discussion with Ted, and I got into a discussion with him about the nature of scholarship. And coming from experimental phonetics and being mentored by somebody who looks at language and the brain, I argued against what I refer to as trivial scholarship, where people appeal to emotions rather than to empirical data. And I argued for such experimental approaches to scholarship whereby findings can not only be verifiable, but also have universal validity. Of course, Ted said, that's nice, except that science itself is not without cultural perspective. Well, I disagree. I said, listen, the chemical properties of any element will be the same regardless of culture. And if you studied biology, your findings will be the same regardless of where you're coming from. He said, yeah, that's true, except that chemists and biologists are cultured beings, and their historical circumstances cannot be divorced from what they do, he insisted. Many such conversations occurred at the center. Inspired by such, amongst others, I took up interest in the sociocultural aspect of language. Now, the center not only made it possible for me to consider such things, they also provided the means to pursue such study and such interest. Indeed, sometimes it is important to locate aspects of significance of emotive culture in ordering the values of an individual. Such questions like, what is dignity? What is success? What is the worth of a person? When is a person and where is a person a relevant person? Such questions are not trivial, and responses to them may not be replicable or falsifiable. I will illustrate aspects of these questions as I demonstrate what in my previous incarnation I will have referred to as trivial linguistics. And during this demonstration, I will be providing insights into the life of Yoruba people in the diaspora. I will be illustrating the place of culture in selfhood, identity, and ultimately I'll be posing the question, to what end scholarship when it's devoid of human perspective? Due to the trivial nature of this discussion, my data will be coming from a listserv, the USA Africa Dialogue series initiated in 2004 by Professor Falola, who happens to be my host tonight, and who has played tremendous and significant role in my own scholarly development. USA Africa Dialogue is intended as a forum for discussion of issues connecting Africa to the rest of the world. I will be looking at the postings between 2004 and 2009. I will be making comments on extrapolated and selected themes. my focus is not so much on the content of the messages. Rather, my focus is on the things that the messages reveal about the culture of the people who are on this site. So it should be clear that the messages are, for me, mere veneers. I am mainly interested in the underlying culture or frame of mind that influences the overt behavior that I will be illustrating as found on this list. And you may be, well, this is my disclaimer. I do not subscribe to the notion of essentialism in culture, and I don't believe that everybody behave alike, so there will be deviation. Nonetheless, it is possible to locate a singular motif that binds a group of people together. Now, due to the, one of the things you might like to ask yourself is, why would you be interested in looking at a listserv in making a scholarly presentation? Well, there are several reasons. One of them has to do with the fact that Professor Falola said to me, you know, I don't understand some of your writings when you write on linguistics. Sometimes there are mathematical formulas and stuff. So you're not going to be talking to your peers. You have to discuss something that anybody whatsoever can relate to. So that's one. Another reason is that the listserv has become extremely popular, and it continues to grow in popularity. It continues to attract people, and the membership or the members are very fanatical about it. On many occasions, I've written to some of these members, written emails to them about collaborative work or things we're doing, official business, and for many days I will get no response. Yet, if you go to this site, they will have posted up to 3 or 4 long, lengthy responses per day. Also, the listserv continues to grow. From 2004 till 2009, it grew from about 2.7 thousand postings a year to about 6,000 postings. And at about 2009 and 2010, membership has grown to about 6,000, with about 3,000 people being able to post directly to it. I called up Dr. Falola to find out his views about the listserv. And he said that this listserv is his main legacy and his own practical effort at community building. Now, if somebody who has produced 120 books, many, many essays, and of course many, 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 many awards, says that his main legacy and contribution is a listserv, I think that such listserv requires closer attention. Now, there is a sense in which the listserv embodies the person of Dr. Falola. He is male, he is Yoruba by ethnicity, he's Nigerian, he's from West Africa, he is a scholar of history of Nigeria, Ibadan, Nigeria and Africa, and he's also an American citizen. Now, when you consider membership at the listserv, it's dominated by Africans and by Americans. When you go to Africa, West Africans dominate the listserv. In West Africa, Nigerians dominate. And then, of all the Nigerian contributors, Yoruba people dominate. So, for that reason, it is easy for Yoruba mode of life and discourses to crystallize within the listserv. And probably because of my own Yoruba root, it is easy for me to find analogy that quickly reminds one of the Heimat. Now, in discussing, I'll be appealing to 2 linguistic terms, and that will be the term of implicature and of presupposition. By implicature is meant assumptions that could be drawn from a text or utterance, and presupposition are those assumptions that are implicit but not made, not stated, and one can take them for granted. Now, in traditional Africa, public discourse is the domain of adults. Elders, people of status, and indigents speak to communal issues. Others do so only by permission. So when you now consider that I've just said that this listserv is home for people who are transnationals, people who are scholars, people who traverse through cultures, you want to ask yourself, who are those who are permitted to discuss at this listserv? Well, at its inception and for many years, Dr. Falola actively moderated the site. What that means is that people who want to contribute will send their write-ups or articles to him directly, and he would disseminate it to everybody. However, before he does that, he will write a little bio about the people, give information about them. For example, introducing Professor Ali Mazrui, he writes, Ali Mazrui, Africa's most famous political scientist, the director of the Institute of Global Studies, the Albert Schweitzer Professor in the Humanities. He has written over 25 books. He is the acclaimed narrator and author of the 9-part television series, The Africans and Triple Heritage. He provides this information. Now, this introduction does not merely provide information about the author. It is about managing the image of the contributors. It allows readers, and by readers I'm referring to those Yoruba people or Nigerian people or Africans, to quickly deduce the age, status, and achievements of the contributor. In a face-to-face conversation, such introduction is not necessary because by the appearance alone, we are able to quickly deduce these important factors. So who can participate? Well, you have to have some credibility to participate. At about 2007, he stopped providing such information about the authors, and people who post directly to the listserv. The only information that members will have about whoever is contributing will be such information that the email provider provides about you. So, and whatever information you allow others to see about you. So, people do not know exactly the status of those who are contributing. So around 2007, there began to appear a curious posting from a name, Cornelius Hammelberg. The name, as you can agree with me, Cornelius Hammelberg does not sound African, yet postings occurring under that name display curious knowledge about Africa and extend familiarity with Africa. I am sure that one of the participants by the name Ama Torishero must have written the mind of everybody when he posed a question to him, saying, "Are you a German or Swedish? It is your name, sir. I was wondering." He did not get a response, and then he repeated his question. Finally, a response came, and he said, "Ama Torishero, I am neither German nor Belgian. How many times have I said that I am a Yoruba man?" Now, pay attention to the term of address. When he posed the question, he said, "It is your name, sir." And when Hammelberg is responding, he called him by first name. This is really important, and I'd like you to keep that information as I will speak to it in a moment. So we have to know who is participating, and we should be able to classify them. In classifying them, there is also a preference for nationals of a country to take the lead in the discussion of their own affairs. So for example, in 2007 again, there was a discussion about Ghana and its former president, Jerry Rawlings. Dr. Henacho, a Nigerian, responded to the comments made by a Ghanaian, Dr. Kwabe. And Dr. Kwabe was not very pleased with the comment. And he has this to say about it: "I am more than competent to offer my unsolicited perspective on the Rawlings regime. For one thing, I am a Ghanaian." Dr. Henacho may take my views as lopsided and sanguine, but I am thankful that he has stated that he is a foreigner. And may I carefully add, he is not a student of Ghana. This is not an isolated case. Reverend Agbali wrote a rejoinder to this and supported the opinion of the Nigerian guy. Reverend Agbali is a Nigerian. Well, he was rebuked for it. Another Ghanaian wrote and says, I don't know where Dr. Agbali is from, but his name sounds like Ewe, and we can only hope that Dr. Agbali is not one of those Ewe intellectuals who belong to the ethnic group of Rawlings and hence do not want anyone to question Rawlings' atrocities. Professor Ken Haru, a distinguished professor of literature who has spent many, many years in Africa and who is a professor of African literature, took offense at such line of thinking. And he wrote, I want to add that as a more or less Oyibo, a Tubab, I find it offensive to read postings that point to whites as outsiders, both to the cultures and especially to the interests of the peoples or issue under discussion. There is no insider-outsider barrier except for the ones that each person creates. There is no magic insider language that others can't learn. There is no experience that is transcendental and unique to one group of people over another. There are only standpoints that are influenced by different conditions that account for different differences among people. You would think that this is clear enough and that this should end that line of thinking. Well, Dr. Uwawa, a Nigerian, begged to differ. He wanted to straighten out Ken, and he had this to say. With all due respect, while agreeing with you about the limiting consequences of creating barriers, there is little doubt that sometimes only Africans can relate better or otherwise to African matters. The same goes for whites, and therefore when some on this group allude to that, it should not be construed as an attack on you or other non-Africans on this list. The language they just don't understand is commonly used by all groups, whites, blacks, Latinos, sometimes with no offense intended. I don't know about you, but for me, I don't know anything more condescending than that. So it is not just a question of nationals jealously guarding their own affairs. Even within a country, you find people, the same thing plays out across ethnicities. So a Nigerian newspaper reported about 2008 that Nigerian prison officials killed an inmate, something that is really, really important. However, Dr. Ojo, commenting on the news report, wrote, what does a Mrs. Maureen O'Malley, a non-indigenous Yoruba, who has no discernible ties to Ibadan or Oyo State or to any Yoruba state, have to be the controller of prison, Oyo State, a Yoruba state? This business of asking foreigners to place and imprison people to whom they are not related or affiliated in any way is pure, simple occupation by foreigners under another guise. Foreigners who have no iota of sympathy for their victims. Now, this is coming from an older person, a professor, and somebody who understands the federal character of Nigeria. Nigeria, in trying to build a nation state, we post all the federal workers to different parts of the country and keep rotating them. The idea is to generate cohesion and allegiance to the state rather than to each sub-unit of the country. Finally, there is also a preference on the list for intellectuals, similar to what you have in African villages, where you want only the elders who are versed, who are wise, preference for them to contribute to discourses. So on the list there's a preference for intellectual, but the question is, who's an intellectual? Well, one of the contributors is Dr. Amina Zeblin. She's a medical doctor by training. However, unknown to most people, she also has a PhD in political science. Now, before it became known that she has a PhD in political science, one of the contributors called her Dokita. Dokita is the way illiterates pronounce the name doctor. It's a way to mock you and to call you an ignoramus, so to say. And he writes as follows. I don't know why Amina thinks she's an intellectual when, from what I've read in her post so far, she fails miserably to interpret other people's argument correctly and consistently. So let me say it clearly this time. A medical degree does not necessarily qualify one as an intellectual. So obviously there's a preference for a specific kind of scholarship, preferably the liberal arts. What I have done up till now is to provide some background information. And what I have tried to convey are these. In order to participate in this village, this home for Africans, we have to know your status. It's absolutely important. We should be able to classify you by nomenclature, by your ethnic and or national affiliation, which shall allow you to contribute on the topic, and of course by your scholarly identification, we shall respect your views. These, of and by themselves, are uninteresting, not very important. What is important is why. Why do we have to go through this verification process? Accreditation of persons, of vetting, of credentials is in service of a larger cultural norm, and that norm privileges status, especially age. I'm going to support this claim in what follows, and I think this is the very crux of my message, and it's absolutely important to all that I've said before. Yoruba people maintain a very polite and formal existence that unfolds in strict adherence to a prescribed code of conduct and in interpersonal relationship within the confines of the principle of seniority. Seniority is extremely important. Yoruba people are stratified in every which way. Actually, a missionary from Europe commenting on about the Yoruba in 1912 said they are more polite than the French. Depending on where you fall in the hierarchy in this stratified society, your quality of life may be influenced. So for example, within a family, there is no generic term with which you refer to your brother or to your sister. We have senior brother, not older brother, and junior brother. We have senior sister, not older sister, and junior sister. So you are always relating to people with reference to where you are on the hierarchy. So for people, therefore, for these migrants, for these Yoruba people, for whom status, identity, and entitlement have been leveled by faceless Western societies where status, achievement, and respect are differently defined, Nigerian migrants are doubly disadvantaged. They have lost their revered places at home, and they have become undervalued in their new present places. The least served has become a place where you recover some of these lost dignities. So consider the use of honorific. You will rarely find Yoruba people on this campus call one another by name. I mean, you will not see anybody say Toyin. The first time I ever said Toyin in my life. Through before you look there. They are so formal to one another. However, it is within an established hierarchy. So you will find them calling themselves professor, doctor. However, the one who is senior will call the one who is junior by first name. So the relationship is asymmetrical. And if you consider Professor Falola, for example, what he's wearing is known as agbada. The quality of the fabrics that goes into making this tells a lot of stories. So what he is wearing, you will not buy in any store, because a tailor will go to him at home and take measurements. And then they will together decide on the kind of fabric that will be used. They will agree on the design, and then this will be woven into the fabric. Like we say in Yoruba, if you watch carefully, he's wearing a red wristband. And then of course there's a staff of office. A cobbler will go and measure his foot, and shoes will be made that will match his appearance. For the trained eye, for the cultured Yoruba person, there is value and status, image being projected. And that has to be honored. Material accumulations, such as vehicle and size of cars or homes, also speak to your image and to your status. See, unlike America, Nigeria does not have a credit system. So if two people are going to buy cars, and one buys a Mercedes-Benz and one buys a Toyota, each one will bring loads of money, put it there, and then walk away with the key. So if I am buying a Toyota and you are buying Mercedes-Benz, status is already established. You're richer than I am. Respect. The opulence of your house and things that are therein also speak to that achievement that we're talking about. So the more expensive things are, the richer you are judged to be, and the greater your status. Titles will garner accolade. Being a chief will assure one a high table in any gathering. If you are a professor, high regard will attend your every pronouncement. Now, having this achievement and the concomitant esteem and respect doubly effaced by the structure of Western societies and the anonymity of the web is perhaps psychologically damaging to transnationals from stratified society. Therefore, in the use of language, you find such phrases like, "You don't know who you are dealing with." This phrase is entrenched in the socio-cultural politics of interpersonal relationship across the South. And it goes on from the Yoruba land all the way to the eastern country. You don't know who you're dealing with. Even in Pidgin, you know Sabi who I be, is also part of our language. So marginalization therefore breeds anger and strife. Thus, verification and argument that you, of identity and argument that you find on the listserv are because individuals seek to recover some of these things that have been removed from them. I will give you an example to support what I've just said. Dr. Onyani, for example, wrote an article on debt relief, and he argued that African debt should not be forgiven them. So the subject matter was debt relief. Reverend Agbali wrote a rejoinder, an argument ensued. Dr. Onyani was very offended by what Agbali wrote. In response, he writes, "In Igbo, we have a saying that it is somebody who doesn't know another person who calls him my friend. Obviously, I'm dealing with an infantile, which is a mistake on my part. I have been married for 35 years. May 30, 1967 was the greatest day of my life when I took the declaration of Biafra from Dr. Pius Okibo to the State House in Enugu. I was sent by Biafra to New York as the ambassador. When Ojukwu published his book, Biafra, in 1969, I was the one who took it to Biafra. When Ojukwu left, I was invited to join the government in exile. When Ojukwu visited the United States the first time, it was my house that he was initially received. For a trained reader and listener, the message is clear. He is reading and giving his own citation and making his claim to seniority. He is saying to Agbali, you are a child, and therefore your ignorance can be forgiven you. I've been married for 35 years. Now, for me to be married for 35 years, I must have lived some. So add that together. I have played a significant role in the history of the country. So I am one of those people you will be reading in your history textbooks. If Biafra had succeeded in seceding from the country, I will not only be an ambassador, I am part of the government. Oh, by the way, when Ojukwu came to the United States, we hosted him in my house. I had a house in the US. Of course, The message had its intended effect. Agbali was floored and was awestruck, as his response shows. I want to note that Chief Dr. Onyeani is an African leader. I will renege in that spirit, not of cowardice, but of reverence for his position as older than me and as a chief of Ahafia. He's smitten by age, by achievement. Order has been restored. Each one of us have taken our positions. Dr. Onyeani is now the senior, Agbali is now the junior. And the otherwise culturally sanctioned norm of interaction can now proceed. A year later, to show you the extent of the punishment he got, he wrote, I remember during my own hotly contested diatribe with my now respectable elder friend and indomitable Ohafia chieftain, Dr. Onyeani, the great Ohafia chief, Dr. Onyeani, accomplished Ohafia chief. This is the way he now addresses Dr. Onyeani. And Dr. Onyeani addresses him not even by his first name, Anthony, but by an acronym, Tony. Order has been restored. You don't know who you're dealing with. Now he knows who he's dealing with. This is not an isolated case. On one occasion, an associate professor, Pius, wrote on literature, and he had an altercation with another person, also an associate professor called Ikide. A third person who goes by the name Professor Oye, his email actually says Professor Oye, and woe betides you if you call him anything other than Professor Oye, contributed to that issue. Remember, it was on literature, but this is what it's got to say. How old is Pius? How old is Ikide? I'm wondering whether Pius would shower the same respect to me or to Ikide should we meet at a conference, despite the fact that I did not teach him. Today we are of the same academic rank, but I began my teaching career in 1988, some years before Pius earned his BA in literature. One more example, and this is on another issue. Two people were arguing, and Dr. Ojo has this to say about that argument. It is okay for you, Joe, to be rude. Now, this is the way he wrote it, so I copied it exactly as it is. Uncouth and disrespectful to someone who is older than you. And I could easily have been your teacher, your professor in school and in college. I am in a position to have easily been your school teacher and college professor. And don't you ever forget that, boy. I could easily have been your senior brother, if not your father. Self-esteem, according to Fukuyama, is the propensity to invest the self with a certain value and to demand recognition for that value. In quest for prestige or recognition, human beings are willing to risk their lives. They combat others in a ferocious battle, which eventually produces class. In this case, class of seniors versus juniors, class of elders versus young, class of those to be revered and those to give reference. These transmigrants consider this to be a home away from home. And it is here that they want to reclaim some of those things that would have been theirs by right, should they have been back home. And so a lot of arguments occur, a lot of fights occur on the listserv. And I'm arguing that all of this is in order to establish age, so that we know who to listen to, who can start a debate, and whose voice carries weight. The last part that I'm going to discuss has to do with the fact that this is indeed a community. And being a community, there are other things that are going on in that community. You know, so how many things will we do together if the concept of those things were not built into our language? Words are a very great deal. The rules of their use are wound up with the activities and institutions of the society in which they are employed. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you some of the things that this community does for one another that reveals aspects of relationship, aspects of culture of Yoruba people. In Yoruba land, even though there is hierarchy, it is possible for the younger ones to sanction or rebuke the elders. And there is a formula for that. I'm sure some of you will relate to this. When mom or dad calls all your name, Mary Sue Allen, you know you're in trouble. In this case, you have to be called 3 times. Obuefi Chidi, Obuefi Chidi. How many times I call you? Sabela, Sabela, Sabela. How many times I call you? So once you see this formula, the next thing that follows will be a rebuke of some sort. Yet, in it all, we remain respectful. In addressing Dr. Ojo, it's Dr. Ojo, Dr. Ojo, Dr. Ojo, and then there is that plural, Una. So you address the elder in plural, and they respond to you in the singular. There is also the use of proverbs on the list. Many proverbs, these arrays of proverbs depict the place of wisdom and experience within social interactions among Africans. To become matured and to be able to participate in discussions at public square requires that for one to be versed in proverbs and in allegories. As a result of this, the public sphere is the domain of adults. And as these people interact, we begin to find evidence of self-examination. We begin to see them grapple with the consequences of modernity and modernism. We begin to see how people relate to their culture vis-a-vis the new culture or competing forces within the society. So one interesting debate came up about abuse. This time, a professor was asking to understand under what circumstances the Nigerian Road Safety Commission can impound a vehicle. However, in the narrative that followed, she wrote this: on Monday, I gave one of my female students my car to buy fuel for me at the mega station at Amabia. A huge debate ensued. Is this abuse or not? Well, there were 2 camps. The one camp saying that this action, that people who did this were operating the tradition or traditional culture. And others said, no, it is an abuse of the young lady. I'll give you those 2 opinions. This is the anti-traditional view. Haba, let me be sure I understand this. I give you my daughter, pay all her school fees to you. You wake up in the morning and you say to my daughter, take my car keys, go and park your pretty self at the gas station for 8 hours until you buy me petrol, and then come back and do only God knows what. And when I complain, you start talking about patriarchy, African culture, and such nonsenses. And everybody keeps quiet about this abuse of power. What is African about taking advantage of your student? What part of unethical do you folks not understand? Well, the opposing view reads, do you know how many of my elderly professors in Ibadan I call and still call daddy and mommy, just because they fall into the age brackets that will make the idea of calling them professor rude and unworkable. Even as associate professor, I still find myself in situations where I run occasional errands for my elderly professors while visiting them in Nigeria. When you meet our elderly colleagues at meetings in North America, what do? They extend a hand for a warm handshake, and you take the hand and instinctively bow down in half gesture of prostration, with sir, starting and ending every statement you make. You can't help the prostrating part, especially if you're a Yoruba man. Those are modes of transactions. we brought from home. We also get comments about Nigerian government from this online interaction. Again, there was a heated argument, and there were camps. And one of the contributors wrote to rebuke somebody who, instead of stopping the fight, seems to be contributing to the fight. And he said this: Dr. Igeseme, now what for you? Why add adulterated Niger kerosene to a fire we're trying to quench? In this phrase, Pius reveals how, motivated by gains, Nigerians add other liquid to kerosene, the popular cooking oil. The consequence of this act is countless explosions that have caused innumerable body injury and, of course, destroyed a lot of lives and homes. From this posting, one can understand the absence of the nation state in monitoring product safety and in protecting consumers in Nigeria. And as they continue to debate, they also reflect on their own sojourn in America. They show anxiety about old age. So Sabela wrote this. He said, and please remember not to live and die in America. But of course, not everybody cares about how and where they die. Not everybody cares whether they die among strangers or not. But to the extent that you care, it is better to die among friends and family. If you lived all your productive life in this country, you're likely to end up in a nursing home among strangers. You are likely to die alone and lonely and be buried in a cemetery with unknown ghostly faces. Even the earth and worms and the moisture will wonder about you. You may not be acknowledged. You may not be celebrated. So please die an African death with dignity. These are some of the angst that the people carry around. To die with dignity and to be given a dignified burial assures passage to the court of ancestors and probably gives guarantees that you might be reincarnated into the next world. So some of these things are not trivial. They are really important. The village square is also a very cohesive community. Similar to the talking drums that we have in that Africa of your imagination, that Africa that you think, that you see in your mind that is static, peaceful, and serene, where with the talking drum you announce everything. At this village square that Professor Falola has provided for his kinfolk, we find also advertisement of achievements. Information are given when somebody does well, or people writing to announce death. So even when, for example, when Dr. Falola got his honorary degree, he was celebrated. In concluding, I'd like to say that unfortunately, in spite of the fact that the listserv is endowed with poets, database, philosophers, preachers, sometimes their own clowns and boasters. There are some who will say, just wait for me, I will stomp my foot on the ground and you will be swallowed. Boastful characters, just like you find in every village. In spite of all of this, the listserv, to my mind, is all talk and no action. Now, I'm not saying that they do not help people. If one of them is in trouble, yes, there's been calls for help and they receive help, but as a body, it's all talk, and that's all they do. It's mainly a dialogue series. If it at all nurtures any desire for action with respect to Nigeria or Africa, such are mainly aspirational. For example, there was an instance when a Nigerian British citizen was on a British Airways flight going to Nigeria, and he observed how another Nigerian was being abused by policemen. So he stood up and tried to defend this man. He was thrown off the plane, and British Airways banned him for life. So when people on the listserv got a wind of this, they were of course really angry, and all sorts of suggestions were made, how they would storm British Airways, how they would take them to court, boycott British Airways, make our feelings known. So invariably, Dr. Pius Adesami was requested to coordinate all these responses. In January, actually April of last year, I wrote Dr. Adesami to find out what happened and if he coordinated any activity. And this is his response: no. The suggestion for action never really gathered steam on USA-Africa dialogue after the initial hot air. But it did gather steam on other forums, and I was involved. Mr. Motade eventually won a lawsuit in London against British Airways and was compensated. It will be quite interesting indeed to find a Nigerian whose philanthropic activities are located outside the ethnicized boundaries of origin. Now, different from the pre-independent generation that banded together, singularly focused on going back home and liberating African states at all costs, current transmigrants mainly seek personal achievements and individual glory across both systems. They want to be successful here and they want to be successful back home. Fukuyama underscores the importance of the desire for recognition. Following Hegel, he argued that human beings are more than economic beings. In addition to seeking such things as food, shelter, and the preservation of their own bodies, fundamentally, they seek to be desired by others, to be recognized just as human beings, a person with certain worth or dignity. Human beings seek recognition of their own worth or of the people, things, or principles that they invest with worth. Before I conclude, it is perhaps important to once more underscore the depth of the liminal existence and consequently gain insight into the life of the transnationals. They have no childhood memory in this place, and a lot of them, since they only came here as adults, did not go to school here. So they have no friends. They have colleagues, and Yoruba people like to just show up at their friend's house without calling ahead of time. Such surprises. It's like a lover showing up suddenly, and it gladdens the heart. Yoruba people don't like to eat alone. If you cook your meal, the joy of it is having a lot of people eat with you. And in this place, some of these lifestyles are not made possible. What have I tried to do? Well, I've tried to argue or show some of those things that are really important to the Yoruba people in their lives. Some of those things that really constrain their interactions online. By using your cultural lenses and looking at people's conversation, and by invoking certain linguistic tools, we can make sense of them. And it seems to me pretty clear that there is nothing trivial in the many issues that you find going on in this list. It is perhaps also not trivial to devote scholarship and resources to those aspects of our lives that do not show immediate gain. So indeed, engineers and doctors may be doing very observable things, but social cultural scientists are equally important and significant. Thank you for your attention. The question, I read two parts to it. One is directed to me as a person, and one is a generic question. As a person, I ceased to be a transmigrant a long time ago. Yes, I have a root in Nigeria, but that's about it. I'm not one of those people who think of home as Nigeria. When I think of home, those two ladies back there, my two daughters, those are my home. And wherever they are, that's where I'm at home. I have no other ambition of going anywhere or living anywhere. Now that's what. However, the general aspect of the question with respect to when do you become a transmigrant or when do you realize that, to a large extent, people actually never realize it. A transmigrant mentality is that I'm going back home at some point. Now there are aspects of this that are left. For instance, there was an occasion where somebody went to Nigeria, another person went to Ghana, and when they came back, members of the listserv said, welcome back home. And another person took up an issue with it, saying, what is this? When they were going, we said, they were greeted in Ghana and in Nigeria, welcome home. Now they are coming back here and you're saying, welcome home. Which is which? So for a lot of people, therefore, the transmigrant identity is that they are unsettled. And actually there's an instance where, I think it was Anthony Agbadi, who also wrote about it, calling them people who have no loyalty of any kind. And the loyalty they have is mainly to themselves. Accumulation of wealth here, showing off of wealth over there, probably.
Questions, comments?
I'll lean over. I found this talk to be particularly interesting, and I found many aspects of it quite funny. I do wonder, though.
Unfortunately, nobody laughed.
I do wonder, though, where the effects of globalization take place, because we are talking about people who are moving, crossing borders, and there is necessarily an impact of the societies in which they find themselves, as well as the conversation between the societies from which they come. How would you characterize that conversation and that impact beyond just a hierarchical relationship that is missing? Because that's also to say, in some sense, that the receiving community where they're migrating to does not have these social structures in place, but they must necessarily engage with these social structures. So how would you characterize that relationship in both places?
Thank you. That's actually very interesting. I have to say this, and this is not self-promotion. Most of these issues I grappled with, and it is in the book that is coming out next month. So I left out a lot of things, trying to squeeze most of the things in for 45 minutes. Transmigrants, specifically those of African origin, have had no problem whatsoever being integrated in any society to which they go. They will play their part, contribute effectively. However, there is always a certain sense of alienation that accompanies them. So they do interact with the society, they contribute, they participate, but they still see themselves as not of this society or of that society. And the notion of home is prevalent in their undertakings. So to the extent that the issue of globalization occurs, they see it such as means to an end, not necessarily a transformative one on an individual level. And that would be my suggestion. Issue of modernization and modernity, I call it, going on there is not necessarily instigated by what is going on here. I mean, in the area and realm of popular cultures, maybe. However, changes are never abrupt. It has to be so slow that people can still interact intergenerationally. So while changes are occurring between in the relationship between old and young, within the society, for example, the traditional society, no one will be so motivated by gain that they will add other liquid to kerosene, for example. So such greed and the absence of the state, these are all issues of globalization and modernization that is affecting the people. So there is a different dynamics going on there. Now, the transmigrants profit from both ends. So they are sort of the oil that is on top of the water, not mixing.
Please, we'll take 2 or 3 more questions. For those of you who want to have your dinner, just be patient so that we can respect the listening speaker. 2 more questions. Okay, please. This is a difficult question coming from South Africa. And he's also, he spoke, he gave you a lecture last year, right?
2 years ago.
2009.
Thank you very I'm quite loud, so you should be able to hear me. Thank you very much for a very interesting and provocative talk. I have a methodological question about internet research more generally. Like a lot of my students want to do it. It's a weird middle ground, like you can get sort of ethnographic information, but you don't have to go through the ethical subject review board. So I'm asked, do people mind if you quote in your scholarly work stuff they've posted on a listserv? I mean, because I think also there's a way in which I'm assuming many people in this room are parts of message boards or listservs. There's a way in which there's a whole new kind of possibility for community, but also a whole lot of intellectual property issues and ethical issues that emerge through doing this kind of work. So I'd just like to hear your experience and what you think about it.
Thank you. Actually, Professor Falola raised that question during the evolution of his talk. And my response was and still is, at the inception of this USA-African dialogue, UT provided the space, hosted it on its website, and it continues to grow. And then about 2007, the African USA-Africa dialogue migrated to Google. It is not exclusive to members. You can chance upon it just by browsing the internet. So to the extent that people post to it, to the extent that it is free and open and it's not censored, to the extent that there is no membership due or fees to be paid, all costs associated with it are borne by the convener. To that extent, it's a public property, and therefore I have no reservation whatsoever, citing exactly what I found there. And in most cases, I show the date that I went online and I got the information. So for me, for such issue, to the extent that it is open and freely available to all, I think I'm on safe ground. Unfortunately for my students, they're not allowed to do anything from the web.
One last question. Okay, well, next month a book will be released on US-Africa dialogue by a professor at the University of Florida, Gainesville, who wrote his PhD thesis on this for Falola. So it's generated the kind of attention that was not intended when it was created. From the topic and the description, I did not know that that's just what it's going to talk about. It has been a delight, it's been a pleasure. And we thank you all for coming. And September 3rd week next